Thank you.
So a warm welcome to everyone. It's quite very early in the morning. I just came from Hong Kong Island, so I had to wake up extremely early to be here, and I'm very happy that I came. Because even though I teach at Hong Kong UMBA for the past 8 years, I never had the privilege and the honor to be here in this campus, and I'm very, very impressed. So congratulations to everyone from Chinese University. So what I'm bringing today is a bit of two main points, which is how can we somehow plug in the SDGs, the words SDGs and innovation, within what is currently happening here in Asia Pacific and with all the entrepreneurial ecosystems. So for example, if we look at a couple of years ago, when I started teaching entrepreneurship at Hong Kong UMBA, what we realized is that entrepreneurship was for entrepreneurs, period. And who were these entrepreneurs? They were brave individuals. They were the ones that wanted to kind of challenge a bit the status quo, but they also wanted the ones that kind of start realizing that the world was changing, that with all that was happening with artificial intelligence, with all the fintech, with all this kind of wave of technology that was coming, that they want to somehow be part of it and be part of it at an earlier stage. Now, for the program that I run, initially what we had was what we call the aspiring entrepreneurs. So these were the brave souls that wanted to kind of do something to change the world. Now, fast forward 8 years from the time that we started the program at Hong Kong UMBA, what we realize is that we're having more and more people, or in this case students, that somehow want to undergo the cycle of entrepreneurship, understanding the cycle of startup, not so much to start their own company or their own venture, but to be able to then go to the main companies that are, or the traditional companies that are somehow more and more launching their own, what I call corporatepreneurship or intrapreneurship programs. Now, in case of what companies are doing this, just look around. I would say that if you look at it 5 years ago, you would have like a handful or a couple of them. Some of them were innovating within their supply chain, within their core of business. But what we're seeing today is that the majority of companies, what we call the so-called traditional or big corporations, which, by the way, were once a startup, okay? So every corporation was once a startup. If we look at the Apples, if we look at the Facebooks, but let's look into China. If you look at the Alibabas, Jack Ma was an English teacher. He had an idea, he had a vision, okay? So let's look at this and let's not kind of discourage the youth entrepreneurship now as just kind of wild youngsters, but they can be the one that will be heading the big corporations of the future. When we talk about innovation technology, normally the word that comes to mind is the big data, the fintechs, and so on. We also realize that themes like artificial intelligence, by the way, this was a slide that I presented on the conference 4 years ago, where the company called IDC, they predicted that by 2018, which is now, 75% of all software will have some sort of AI integrated. And by the way, the news is that the majority of the software that you guys use, from Windows, from apps and so on, they all are starting to have some sort of AI and predictive analytics inside to somehow help you to have a better user experience. Now, we also see other cool stuff happening. This was the flying suit. By the way, it's already on sale in Selfridges in London. You cannot go from here to Macau because you can only fly for 9 minutes. Okay, so you probably fall. But it's interesting, and we're seeing a lot of these cool innovations associated with entrepreneurships, but it's not only on this part. Let's look at what's happening to the very young youngsters that are somehow being born with all this innovation without even having to go to university, without even having to go to this kind of cool incubation programs, and they're kind of somehow born with it, and they are be able to do their day-to-day things and tasks and so on, using already all this coolness stuff that are being created either by big companies and also by the entrepreneurs. In this case, this young girl, she's paying for her chocolates or candies or whatever she's buying with her watch. By the way, even my watch cannot do that, okay? She's paying with her watch with all these fintech devices. So where do we come in and what I would like to convey? I'm chairing a task force. It is based out of the United Nations ESCAP Sustainable Business Network. So this is the UN, the parliament that kind of convey the countries in Asia Pacific. And what they have done was the team from ESCAP has recognized the importance of the SDGs, and they wanted to create a series of task forces of business leaders that around Asia Pacific that somehow could help to create this connection between the private sector, the governments and so on, with also the youth and the corporations and other parts of society. So in our side, we were very honored to be able to lead this task force, which I chair. It's called the Youth and Women Entrepreneurship Task Force. Our goal is to support the entrepreneurial ecosystems and also to help to leapfrogging economic growth. Our task force is comprised of experts that are from all areas of Asia Pacific, and we're talking from Central Asia, the Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, all the way to the Pacific Islands, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Fiji, and so on. And our goal is to create a series of initiatives and lead a series of initiatives and programs. Some of them are flagships, some of them are partnerships, that somehow have the core of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the question here is, this is a slide that, I mean, I'm here on the stage and I'm looking to the audience and I'm seeing all the SDGs there. So I believe that by this conference, which will last from now until the 10th or the 11th, by the last day, you will all be with a degree on SDGs. Okay? So you all have a lot of experiments and a lot of people speaking about the SDGs. And so what we want to do is, we want to see how to bring the SDGs to the core of the program that we run. And by the way, this slide on the back is the area or the countries that ESCAP comprises. It's around 62 countries, which are approximately 53 countries, member countries, and 9 associate member countries. So this is our sphere of action. But we also, with our connections with not only Africa, South America, and Europe, we also then plug in these ecosystems bilaterally. So Asian with the rest of the world, or global, and then global with the rest of with Asia. Now, one of the questions that was always asked is, how can you plug in SDGs into startups, knowing that most of the startups, they want to become the next Jack Ma, right? So they want to make millions. They want to be very successful, right? Now, what we've seen from this research from KPMG, was that, yes, making money and become rich was important at 52%, but let's look at what the arrows point at. We have 91% of developing new technology and products. We have 87% of advanced community development, and we have 81% of solving problems for people. Okay? So what we're seeing is that, yes, making money is important. Yes, everyone wants to become a millionaire, but what we're seeing that this new generation is trying to kind of plug into things that go beyond the money. And I think that is where we as task force are very keen to kind of work with all these ecosystems and plugging in the SDGs. And there are many examples out there. This example, for example, it's in Indonesia, where people can pay for their bus ride with plastic bottles. Okay? Now, you don't go to the bus with a plastic bottle, you have to render it beforehand, okay, to get your ticket, but this is already happening. On another example, what we're seeing is that, for example, in this collaboration, we're seeing Chinese university students, they're collaborating with farmers to kind of bring farming to the next level. We also see another example in the Netherlands, where they're kind of getting, taking care of all this kind of plastic rubbish and all this kind of excess, and kind of seeing how they can be useful. And if we look at Asia Pacific and the oceans, and the recent articles about the turtles with consuming bottled water and plastic and so on, and all the plastic in the oceans, I think these guys are doing something very interesting in how to kind of reuse the plastic into something meaningful. And last but not least, we also have to speak about the sustainability of the cities. This is one of the examples that's already out there, where China, beyond the solar panels, they're already kind of seeing how they can somehow create all these renewable energies, which is very aligned and very interesting to the SDGs as well. So how do we somehow bring all this value, and what do we do as a task force to somehow plug in with the ecosystems and bring value to Asia Pacific and to the rest of the world? So on one hand, we create a series of platforms and ecosystems to kind of start creating and generating all this connectivity. We realize that, for example, there's a lot of things happening in Hong Kong, there's a lot of things happening in China, but if we go to Kazakhstan, we see a lot of things happening there, but people don't communicate. If we go to Taiwan, people don't communicate. If we go to South Korea, there's a lot of stuff happening there. There's a lot of things happening in Hong Kong that I have no clue that could be of value to the young entrepreneurs. So what we've done is we created a couple of platforms. This was beta tested in Myanmar. This was 4 years ago when Myanmar was changing the regime. And so this was also when Wanadu and Telenor, the two telecom companies, the mobile phone companies, went to the system. So this is probably one of the last countries that went from having no mobile telephony to suddenly everyone has a fourth or fifth generation mobile phone. It was quite interesting. We also partnered with a company that brought the first World Virtual Fair to Asia Pacific. This happened between May and June. What we did was we connected with 11 countries here. We brought around 70 startups and entrepreneurs to have their first exhibition on the first World Virtual Fair. So there's kind of, you don't have to travel, you don't have to create stuff, you just kind of exhibit stuff, and there's a lot of cooperation and synergy there. And we also collaborating with what we call the bigger companies. In this project, for example, we're partnering with a company out of the US, which kind of just recently won an award on all this kind of big data technology. And we're kind of partnering with a company that create and produce these kind of low-range satellites to see how we can bring these innovation and these technology tools to startups, entrepreneurs, and youth all around in Asia Pacific, including those places where accessing to internet, like, for example, the Pacific Islands, and what Ben was saying, is still quite a challenge. Right? We also have a series of education and participate in task force, participate in a series of education, incubation, acceleration programs. We just recently launched the Social Impact Lab at Hong Kong U, which is going to start this semester. So what we want to do is not so much for students to create social enterprises, but what we want them to do is to kind of work with real startups and to kind of understand how these startups can then plug in the SDG to the core DNA of what they're doing. So it's a bit of a different proposition. We also have the business lab, and this is what brings me also here. I mean, I've been a professor at Hong Kong U MBA for the past 8 years. This was the finals last year where we had Alibaba, we had Microsoft, we had Cyberport, we had all these guys at the jury panel. This was the launch of this year. This year's program, we went from 6 teams to 12 teams, so it looks like everyone now either wants to be an entrepreneur or undergo the cycle of entrepreneurship. These are some of the examples of the projects. So these guys were kind of doing 3D printing frames, glass frames. These guys were bringing agriculture to the center of Hong Kong, so they have their own hydroponic farm in Causeway Bay. I mean, farming and Causeway Bay, they don't match. There's something that doesn't match there, okay? These guys are doing that. We also launched what we call a hackathon, which is a 1-week intense workshop, which we call SDG Business-on. Last year, we've done it with the Hong Kong U UST Business School, and we also brought a couple of our members in the business lab where students could collaborate to bring the SDGs into the core of their projects. We've also collaborated with Hong Kong U Sociology Department. Now what these guys were doing was, their program was very interesting. They were kind of having a program where students had to create all these projects to see how technology is impacting the world. So we kind of agreed, and Tommy Tse, the associate professor there, he's also part of our task force, and we've agreed to kind of say, let's bring this a bit of a notch up. So how can we kind of go through your program having how technology can impact society, but also how does SDGs, how can technology also impact the SDGs? And the results was that we have a video interview there, was very, very, very interesting because they started somewhere just focusing on technology and then they realized that their project went way beyond just by plugging in the SDGs, okay? This is one of the other programs that we also do. We do a user experience program with a very famous United Kingdom, UK university, where we have teams from their side collaborating with our teams from our side and kind of revamping their startup projects, so kind of start creating this kind of collaboration between Asia and the rest of the world. We also done a series. We now have around 30 videos where we've interviewed entrepreneurs and startups and kind of understanding a bit more how did they started and so on to kind of help other entrepreneurs to understand how to do their business. We're also very keen on talks and panels like this one, because we believe that by bringing the message, by communicating, by creating these kind of informal conversations may lead to future programs and to future results. So for example, we brought last year, the ESBN brought last year for the first time in Hong Kong, the first Asia Pacific Business Forum, which is the APBF, the flagship ESCAP event, where we had the Undersecretary General, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, and a lot of dignitaries from Hong Kong coming in Hong Kong. This was in April this year. We also very keen to kind of go a bit beyond the edges. So in this case, we were with a company or with an organization called SDRI, and we're kind of debating how can we somehow plug in entrepreneurship and the SDGs into the elderly part of society. We're also very involved in kind of these events, kind of where we can plug in the technology. So this was at Hong Kong. This was last week, the FinTech event. We also plugging in a lot of these events from other parts of the world. So this was, for example, the Expo Blockchain. This was happening in Brazil, where we plugged in through the task force experts to plug into this ecosystem. And we also, above all, I think one of the core of what we do is the collaboration program. We believe, like other people have mentioned today, that collaboration is critical. I mean, we can do so much on our own. So what we have been doing, and just kind of to share as an inspiration to kind of see what we can do next after this conversation. For example, we partnered with Microsoft on their Imagine Cup, where we kind of brought the business skills into their project. These are young students that collaborate and create all these technology projects for Microsoft using Microsoft technology. We also collaborated with Citibank on their Creative Future. What they were doing was they were opening their retail banking APIs for startups and students to somehow plug in with them. We also plugged in and collaborated with Brink. These guys are doing everything that has to do with drones. And it was very interesting because when we were doing the last APBF, there was from the Asia Pacific, or from the Pacific Islands, they were very keen on bringing this drone technology. So we kind of started creating this collaboration between Hong Kong and the Pacific Islands on drone technology. We collaborated with also India FinTech event, bringing delegations all around the world to Hong Kong and kind of ensure that they kind of connect and share experience and create new business. And so as a last pointer that I would like to bring here today for this presentation is that my message that we need the youth to help us to create the present and to help us to paint the future. And I think it's not only the youth, but also all the organizations. So from our side, this is our website, connectyet.org, where we kind of launched the majority of our initiatives. So let's make this not the conclusion of this presentation, but the beginning of a dialogue and see what we can achieve. Thank you very much.